Last video, we took a look at a lot of the built-in JavaScript helper functions associated with micro application development, but we never really talked about some of the RESTful CRUD functions like app.get, post, put, and delete. And so in this video, we're going to try to use some of the functions that we learned about in the last training video and combine that with maybe some of those CRUD functions that we left out on. So in order to do that, we're actually going to create a shopping list application. So here I am in this thing, and I'm going to create a new application called shopping list. Okay, so here we are. We've got our shopping list, and I'm going to go ahead and click on that to dive in here. Okay. So we've got our resources here, and in order to interact with a third-party API, we kind of need something, at least for this example, that's somewhat generic, that's going to let us put whatever data we need in there. So I'm just going to create a new resource here called shopping list, and I'm going to call it /shopping list. And yes, we are going to go out and fetch that thing when this application loads. If we remember from previous videos, this is going to go get all that data at load time. We could actually do an app.get, now that we're getting into that now, to fetch that data after the fact, but it is actually helpful for us to just go get that as part of the initial data load. Okay. And then we are going to have to write some scripts. We're definitely going to use some templates, and we're definitely going to create some forms here. But you'll notice that we haven't instantiated anything yet, and I want to get into that real quickly so that we can start binding our resources to our APIs, and we can see what that looks like. So I'm going to dive into my groups and click on this default group over here so we can create a new app instance. So we'll go into app instances. We're going to do a new app instance, and this is going to be our shopping list app. Shopping list. Okay, that looks good. And the first thing that I'm going to do when we go into here is I'm going to go into my resources, and I'm going to bind the shopping list resource to something that I have here called a NoSQL DB API. If you're familiar with something like MongoDB, where you can just kind of take JSON objects and shove them into a database, that's kind of what this is. It's a little bit of a poor man's MongoDB, but effectively what we're going to do is we're going to have an array of these shopping list objects, or these list objects, and we're going to put them into this thing here. So you'll see what that looks like in a second, but if I just go to this URL right here, you'll notice that we're just going to get back an empty array because we don't actually have any shopping list items in here yet. So that's what we're going to be starting with. But as we do posts and stuff to this API, it's going to start adding these objects in there, and that's going to allow us to build up our shopping list. Okay, so we've got that built out, and it's time to go back in and start editing this micro application. So why don't we start here? Oops, I don't know if I actually saved that. Maybe I didn't save that properly. There we go. NoSQL DB. Go ahead and save. All right. So we'll go back into our edit our micro application. No errors over here. And I think what we're going to do is probably start by just trying to build out a template here before we actually write any scripts. And because we're building a shopping list, I'm just going to use some standard Bootstrap to create a list. So we're going to do a unordered list, and I'm going to add some classes in here, some standard Bootstrap classes, and I believe we can say list group here. All right, so there's our list group, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to iterate through all of our shopping list items here. So we're going to iterate through our shopping list, shopping list. There we go. Okay, and then for each one, we're going to do a list item. So we'll do that here, and I'm going to add some more classes in here. We'll do a list group item. Okay, so for the most part, all we're really going to want to put in here is the shopping list item that, or the name of the item here that we have. So I'm going to just go in here and say we'll call this, we'll have to define it something. This is going to be item name. Yeah, we'll just do item like that. Okay, so effectively we're iterating through everything that comes back here as our shopping list, and we're going to display it as a list, and we're going to print out the item. Okay, so we don't actually have anything in that API yet. As we looked over here, there's really nothing in there yet. So really, this is going to print pretty much nothing right now. But we can go ahead and try that out. So let's go ahead and visit this thing, and that's what we get back. Yeah, so we don't really get anything back yet. That actually kind of makes sense. So really, before we can actually render our list and have that be meaningful, we kind of need a button here that's going to create a new shopping list item. So let's go ahead and make a button. This is going to be similar to what we did in the previous video. class. We'll do a button primary. Okay, and this is going to be called add new item. That makes sense. And we're going to put an ID on here so we can identify it. And this is going to be add item. Okay. All right, that looks good. And as we talked about before, we're going to need to, in our script, first we're going to define our callback. So we've got something here. And in our callback function, we're gonna bind to the click event on our add item button. So we'll add a thing here that says app.click, and we are binding to a ID of add item, and the function that we call is going to be this guy here. Okay, so now we've got a button, and we've got something that's going to be called. So what do we do when the add item button is called? Well, I think also from the previous video, we talked a little bit about forms. So let's go over here into our form and see if we can build a new form for a shopping list item. So this is going to be called like shopping list item. Okay. All right, so we've got our shopping list item over here, and let's see, what should we put in here? We'll just call it the name of the thing, I guess. That'll work just fine. We could add other things in here if we want to. Maybe we could add like the location in the grocery store or something like that. But for now, we're just gonna do name. Keep it really simple. So we've got a form here called shopping list item, and then within the shopping list item form, we've got a field just called name, which is relatively straightforward. Okay, so let's go back to our script and let's do app.form. And if you remember, the first thing that we have to do in our app.form is we have to say the name of the form. So let's call that shopping list item. And we're actually going to have this open in a modal, the same as we did before. We don't need to bind that to a DOM element. And then we're going to say on save, and we'll have this call a function. And this is going to be our form event. Okay. All right. So again, pretty much should be basic from what we talked about before, where we have a click event. That when we click on the button, it's going to open up this form. It's going to be the shopping list form. What's new now, though, is that we're going to actually try to do a post verb out to that API. But let's just see if what we've got here for now. I'll throw a debugger in here and see if we've got something that actually is working. Make sure we don't have any bugs in here yet. So as we saw before, there's really no list items in here yet, just because we don't actually have anything on our API. But I should be able to click on this button. There we go. That opened it up. It looks like we did get a an error though, and I think that's because instead of save, I really should have done on save as an event. Save itself isn't actually a function, so put a comma here, and I believe we are missing a close parentheses. Okay, so let's try that again, and I'm going to click on this button. Okay, so no more errors, and I'm just going to go ahead and say test and press save. That puts us in a debugger here, and we can then hopefully look at our form event. And if we look at our form, we can do a get on that. So we'll do form event.form.get, and let's see if we actually got our data back. Yes, we do. We have name equals test. Fantastic. Okay. So this is where we're going to start diverging from what we talked about previously. We're going to go here and look at our app.post function. So this is actually doing a CRUD AJAX call to that external API, and you can read through the documentation here, but effectively we have to tell it the resource name that we're going to call, which is going to actually be this over here. So that's just going to be shopping list. That's the name of our resource. And then the data that we're going to send. So the data that we're going to send is actually just going to be the data that we get from the form, and then we're going to have a callback function here for if it succeeds or if it fails. Okay, so let's see if we can throw that in here, and we're not still stuck in a debugger. Good. All right, so we're going to do another one, and we're going to say app.post now. And we have to name the resource that we're going to use, so we're going to call shopping list here. And the data that we're going to send to that API is really just going to be form event.form.get, right? And we can save that off if it's helpful. This is going to be the new list item equals form event.form.get. Call like that. And then we can just say we're putting this new list item in here, and we'll put a callback function in here for if this thing succeeds. And what's returned in this callback function, if we look at our documentation again, it's actually going to send us a copy of the response. So if we want to look at that response, it's actually coming back from the server. We're going to put that right in here. So let's put another debugger in here, and we'll click and press save on that. And let's refresh again and see what we have. Okay, so let's click add new item. I'm just going to type test in here, and I'm going to press save. Okay, so it looks like it, actually, if we look at our network traffic over here, we did actually call that shopping list API. We did hopefully post some data in here, and it might actually be showing it because we're in the debugger. But yeah, it looks like we sent test in here. And if we go back to our console, look at our sources, and look at our response, here's what it did. It actually created a new object on the server on our API with our kind of MongoDB type thing. It tells us when it was created. It's got a unique document ID. It's got an updated .id, which is really the same as a created ID. But most importantly, we've got the name test that was actually stored in the database. So let's go ahead and press play here. All right. You will notice that when I click save, it didn't actually close the modal because we haven't specifically told it to do that. But if I go ahead and press refresh now, actually, let's go ahead and look at what's in the database here, because this is actually just a list of what's in the database. So let's click refresh. And hopefully, here we go. Since we have actually posted at the database, we have a single item in here that has the name of the item that we had. And if we go back into our code, look at our template, we might have to tweak this a little bit. Yeah, so we'll call this name. It's not actually called item. But we should be able to go into here and refresh, and we should, in theory, actually have an item in our shopping list. So fantastic. This is not a great application because when you click this button, it doesn't actually refresh anything, and you have to refresh the entire application to see anything, and it's not closing the modal yet correctly, but you can see that we're starting to make some progress here. Okay, so let's address a couple things. Firstly, let's make that modal actually close when we want to close it here. So we're going to say form event.form.trigger close, so that'll at least make our modal close properly. And then, if we remember from previously, we have that app.update function, which we can do. So what we're actually doing is we want to append whatever we get back from the response to whatever shows up in our app.data.shoppinglist object. So let's go ahead and do that as well. Let's say app.data.shoppinglist, right? So that would be the list of all of our shopping list items as it's come back. We're going to .push response. Okay, so we're effectively taking the response, that new item that we got back from the server with all that extra information, the doc ID and all of that stuff, and we're going to push that into our shopping list object. And of course, as we talked about before, we have to do an app.update to tell the template renderer that we actually did make a change to it. So hopefully this should be a little bit cleaner than it was last time. Let's go ahead and refresh and see what we've got here. So we're going to add a new item. And since we are talking about a shopping list here, I'm going to add carrots to my shopping list. Let's press save. Close the modal, and it actually added it right here to the list. So we didn't actually have to refresh anything. It added it right in there. And theoretically, if I refresh the page, since we are actually storing this in the database with the API, it should come back and everything should be there as it was before. Perfect. That's what we've got. And of course, if we just look at this route directly, you can see now we've got two items in here, one carrot and one test. Okay, so that's pretty good. We've now got an application that basically allows us to add new items to a shopping list. It persists in a database, which is fantastic. We're pushing data to the database. We're pulling the data back from the database when we restart the application. But the other thing that you typically end up doing with a shopping list is you remove things from the shopping list, right? You add things to the shopping list when you need them, and then when you get to the grocery store, you click a button and you remove them from the shopping list. So really what we need is the ability to go in here and do a delete method on these things. Now, it just so happens that this API that I'm calling expects a doc ID when I do a delete, and so as long as I know what the doc ID is, we can trigger a delete function, or a delete method, and pass this along, and we should be able to delete these items out of there. So let's see if we can make that work. All right, so if we go back into our template, the only thing that we're really showing in these list items is the name of the item. But we probably want to have another button over here that is our delete button. So let's go ahead and add that. Div class equals button. Button, we'll call it danger, so it'll be a red button, and I'm going to make it extra small so that it's not particularly big. And we'll just put a message here that says delete. And I'm not actually going to make it do anything yet. Let's just look at that and see if that looks good. Okay, so here it is. It's on the left-hand side. That's not great though. Let's add a pull right class to here, and so that'll make it so hopefully that delete button is over on the right-hand side. That looks a little more appropriate. Okay, so we've got our list items over here, and we've got a delete button. Now I can click on this delete button all day long, but it's not really going to do anything. So we'll add a class on here, or maybe we'll add an ID on here that is called delete item. Delete item. There we go. Save it like that. And let's bind to a click event on that, right? I mean, same thing that we did before. I'm just going to copy this here. App.click. And this one is going to be on delete item. So let's put a debugger right here and see what we end up with. It looks like we're having... oh yeah, I'm probably not closing out my parentheses. There we go. Perfect. All right, so we've got a debugger in here. We've got a delete button. Let's see if this works properly, if I actually am triggering something when I click delete. Perfect. Okay, so I clicked delete, but how do we know what I've actually just clicked delete on, right? Because it's not really clear at this point what we're actually doing. And so this is where it can be really handy, and this is not necessarily a micro application thing, but this is really just a JavaScript thing or an HTML thing where we can add data information to our to the DOM. So what we're going to do is we're going to do data dash, and we'll call it doc ID, or just ID, equals, and then in here I'm just going to put doc ID, right? So we're adding directly to the DOM. We're going to say the ID associated with this element, with this div, is actually going to be the doc ID that we're getting back from the database. That would be this doc ID over here, this unique identifier. So that will allow us within our application to differentiate between the different things. Okay, so we've got that there. We've got our debugger in here, and let's go ahead and run that again. All right. So this is going to come back. I'm going to click delete on carrots, and here we are. But again, we still need to figure out what that ID is. So I believe we can click on E, and we'll do e.target.dataset here. And this is actually coming back with nothing. So that's a little bit surprising. I would expect that that would have come back with our doc ID. So data-id equals doc ID. Let's actually just make sure that that's in here properly. So we've got delete item. That's interesting. That's not what I've expected. I would have expected the doc ID. So let's see why it's doing that. Okay, so we've got data-id equals doc ID here, and that makes sense. So we're iterating through our shopping list. Oh, we didn't put quotes around it. There we go. That's our problem. It's a little silly decision. Okay, so let's refresh this again. Let's take a look at it. As soon as this comes back, here we go. So let's take a look at it again. We'll inspect it and make sure that we've actually got our doc ID there. There we go. Perfect. So data-id equals this string right here. So that's what we want to get when we click on that. So let's go ahead and click on the delete button. And I'm going to go into the console and type e.target.dataset. And there we go. There's our doc ID. So e.target.dataset.id equals that doc ID. So with that information, we now know exactly which one we're talking about. That's a unique identifier that we can use. So I'm going to just copy this string over here, and we're going to reuse this over here in our script. Okay, so when we do a delete item, we now need to figure out which one we're going to delete. So let's just put a little comment in here so we remember what that was. Okay, so if you remember, all of our data is currently being stored in app.data.shopping-list, and we've been pushing new things on there, but now we want to delete one, which means we have to figure out which one that we're trying to delete. So we could actually iterate through all of our shopping list items one at a time. That would be one way to do this, but we're going to cheat a little bit, and we're going to use a built-in Lodash function called remove. It's going to simplify our life a little bit. Graphene uses Lodash or includes Lodash, so all Lodash functions, and you can read about it over here in the Lodash documentation, are available in here. So let's go ahead and do a lodash.remove, and we're going to go from the app.data.shopping list array, and we are going to be looking for something where the doc ID is equal to this guy right here, e.target.dataset.id. Okay, perfect. So we'll do that there, and I'm just going to do a debugger right here. So in theory, when we call this function, it's going to look through the shopping list array, and it's going to remove anything where the doc ID equals the doc ID of the thing that we just clicked on. Okay, that should be relatively straightforward. And now we're not calling an app.update or anything yet, so nothing's going to get removed, but from the data object itself on the back end, we should see it, should see it missing. All right, so let's go ahead and click refresh. And I'm going to click on carrots here. So right now we've got two things in our array. We have carrots and we have test. And if I click delete on carrots, in theory, when this comes back, it should only show test and not carrots. So let's see what we've got in here. If we look at app.data.shopping list, there's only one item in there, which is good. And it's, of course, test because we deleted carrots. Perfect. All right. So are we done, though? No, we're not, because I deleted it from the local object, but I haven't actually deleted it from the API over here. It's still showing up over here. So whereas before we did an app.post to create a new or to add a new item into that array, we're going to actually call an app.delete this time. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing right here that we've got, and let's do this. Put this up here. We can get rid of this guy since we're done with that. And we'll take out the indentation. We'll remove our debugger. And instead of app.post, we're going to call delete. Now, we're still calling it against the shopping list resource. We're just calling it with a delete verb instead of a post verb. And this time, though, what are we actually passing in here? Well, the important thing that we need to send to this, as I mentioned before, is we need to tell it that we want to delete this doc ID. So we're using that same doc ID that we passed before. And then we have our response here. Now I don't recall what our API actually does when we do that response. So I'm just going to ignore this right now and say ignoring the response. However, once we get a valid response back from the server, that will indicate to us that we did actually successfully delete from the API. And at that point, we feel safe deleting it locally. So we're actually doing two delete events. We're deleting it from the API, and then to keep everything in sync, we are removing it from the local thing. And if you remember from the previous video, we could actually at this point just do an app.refresh and nuke everything and have everything come back down again. That would be one way to do this. But since we're trying to kind of manage everything locally, we're going to do it this way. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that, and let's see what we end up with. Just go ahead and save, and let's see what we have. Now again, you'll notice we aren't doing the app.update yet, so we're not going to see anything disappear from this yet. So let's go ahead and refresh the page, and I'm going to click on delete on carrots. Let's keep an eye on our network activity over here to make sure that it's actually doing a delete event. There we go. So we just did a successful delete event. And if we look, the response came back. Okay, it came back with no response. And in theory, it did just remove it from the DOM. Now, or sorry, from the local data object. Now we can go over to API over here and click refresh. And yes, of course, carrots was removed from that object. And if I go back to here and refresh over here, we should see that carrots is now missing as well. Perfect. So the last thing that we really want to do after we've updated our local object is call an app.update. So the template engine knows to reflect the fact that we just removed this item from our list. So let's add that in there as well, and refresh. Let's see what we have here. So we should have one item in here. That's our test, and I'm going to add a new one here, and we'll call it carrots. We'll add our carrots back in. So that was added correctly, and I'm going to add potatoes. Add that one in there. Okay, it looks like I called it twice somehow. I'm not sure how that happened. And I'm going to go ahead and click refresh. Looks like we've got an extra one in there. Let's go ahead and delete that. And okay, so we've got test, and we've got carrots and potatoes, and we should be able to go in here and just delete them all out one at a time. And if I refresh, now they're all gone. Perfect. So we've got a relatively basic shopping list here. We can add new things, new, right? So we've got something there that's new. We can add other things to it, another, excellent. And then we can clear them out. So not a super complicated application, but you can see how this is pretty powerful and how we could really do some pretty interactive components with all of this stuff. And the nice thing about this is that since we're using forms here, we could actually build some fairly complicated forms that have a lot more information in them. Right now, we're just storing the name of the thing, but as I mentioned before, we potentially could add additional fields in here. So I'm just going to play around in here a little bit. Maybe we'll add a field called category. And then in our options, I will define some categories. So we'll do produce. We'll do meat, snacks. I don't know, anything else. And we'll call this, how about dairy? I'm not sure this is the best shopping list application ever, but okay, so we've just put that in there. And without any additional modifications, without any extra code changes, we've effectively now changed it so we've got another form, or we've got another form element in here, and this is going to be stored off as well. So we can say I'm going to add milk, and let's make that be a dairy thing, and I'll go ahead and click save. And let's see, this is working correctly, I think. Yep, there we go, just taking a little second to load. That's in here, and of course we probably should tell it what section that's in, so let's add category here. Let's add category to our template. So we'll put that in parentheses. Category. Close that out. Save that. And now you should be able to see the category of everything that we've got in here. So of course we don't have categories for those first two, but milk is a dairy thing. Let's see. We'll do meat. We'll do ground beef. Save that. And you can see that we're now adding. We're adding categories in here as well, and all of this information is, of course, being stored in the database. So in addition to the name, we also have the category in here as well. So this could be scaled rather significantly with all kinds of additional form fields in here. We could, in theory, add an update function to this as well. So right now we're really just doing post and delete, but we could also do put as well, so that we could do updates to those existing records. But this is a really just basic way to show you how we can do some of the stuff that we talked about before with the events that we're binding to, but then also combining that with the CRUD function, so AJAX functions as well. So that's really it for this video. I guess I'll see you in the next video where we're probably going to talk more about doing this in a kind of an even easier way. So right now we're talking about getting data from the server, updating that data from the server, and there's a tool called app.grid, which is going to make our lives really, really easy when it comes to this kind of stuff. But I kind of wanted to show it from a fairly straightforward kind of brute force methodology. All right, thanks for watching.